Learning about Scrum is normally something you pay a lot of money to somebody else, not me, I'm not in that business, somebody else, and sit in 3 days of classes, right? So we're going to do in about 25 minutes what would normally take 3 days. Totally doable, in my opinion. Okay? Scrum in a nutshell. You form a team, you collect work, you prioritize work, you pick up some of the work, you do this in something called a sprint, and I'll define a sprint more. Then you show what you did, and then you think, how well did we do what we just did? A moment of reflection called a retrospective, and then you do more of that. You pick up some more of the work, do another sprint, show what you did in the second sprint, and you reflect again on how well did this sprint go compared to the last one. While this is going on, work continues to come in. So that's one thing that's very important to understand about Scrum is it expects a changing environment. It expects that what work was previously thought of might change in size or shape, and new work will come in. So Scrum is really all about trying to deal with change and remain sane in that process. Okay? Let's go to this part about you form a team. I'm going to talk about a few different roles here. By the way, all this Scrum stuff I'm going to define in the way that I've seen it actually play out in real life. And I started doing Scrum in 2006, so it's like 11 years now. And I found that some parts of the theory worked really well, and some parts were total BS. And so I'm going to not go into that part, but just try to tell you what I think will actually work. Okay? There's somebody called a product owner. The product owner is the voice of the customer. You all have customers. I hope you understand that. I'm actually a taxpayer, so that makes me your customer. Okay? There's only one voice of the customer. There are not many voices clamoring for attention. That's the first thing to understand about the product owner is that product owner represents one voice or as many voices as needed. Only one voice, that's tough to say, can talk to the Scrum team at a time. The Scrum team does not want to listen to 20 different people. That's the job of the product owner, to be that interface that says, look, I represent the voice of the customer, and I can tell you what needs to be done. Okay? Then you have somebody called a Scrum Master. People think the Scrum Master is the project manager. Actually, not really. Not in the sense you've known project managers. Not in the sense of somebody walking around with a clipboard saying, what have you been doing lately? Not in that sense. A Scrum Master is one person on the team whose principal responsibility is to remove what we call impediments. An impediment is anything that's stopping you from getting your job done. So a Scrum Master may be very busy or totally idle. It really depends upon how difficult the work was in any particular sprint. And because there are times when a Scrum Master may be totally idle, it's not necessarily a full-time job. That means that Scrum teams don't necessarily have full-time project managers, which is kind of a strange concept, I know. But the idea is you don't really need it. And also, anyone can be Scrum Master who wants to get in the job of clearing impediments. And then finally, we have the team. And I describe the team as people who can pull. So pull here is like special pull. Most of the time, in most of my career, we came up in a world of push. Push means somebody pushes the work onto you, right? So there's a piece of work, give it to John. This is also John's work. Let's push it onto him. This also looks like John's work. Push it onto him. When you push onto work, right, that's just you thinking John's going to do that work, right? And that's you being oblivious to whether John can do it, what John has on his plate. Pull is the reverse. Pull says when John becomes free, when he gets done with what he was doing, he will pull the next most important item. And that's a big difference because when John pulls the item, you can actually legitimately have an expectation that maybe John can answer for that item. But frankly, if you just push stuff on him, and then you say, where's this stuff? That's not really fair. But if John pulled that stuff, it is totally fair now to say, hey, listen, you picked this item, so now I feel like you really own it. So you need a Scrum team where people can transition, hopefully really fast, from being pushed upon to pulling. And actually, that's a very profound cultural shift, which can take sometimes a long time in an organization, because we have grown up from kindergarten getting pushed homework, right? No one has ever pulled homework, right? But think about that, right? What if you pulled our own homework? Okay, collecting work. We're going to talk about something called stories and something called the product backlog. A product backlog is a collection of stories. It is not necessarily a bounded collection. Sometimes it is, because the overall scope of the project is known. So that's the limit. You're not going to have stories that go outside that. But sometimes this overall scope is subject to change. The boundaries are a little fuzzy, so new stories can come in at any time. It's prioritized from top to bottom. Very simple. Stuff that's important that is on top, then flows down to the bottom. And what's a story? A story represents a piece of work that needs to get done. And I would define it here as something that needs to get done that can get done in one sprint. And then I'm going to define sprint in terms of what it can do in a story. So that's where the recursive part comes in. But a sprint is a piece of work. And it's actually a piece of work that's expressed in a particular way, as I'll show you. And that piece of work needs to be something you can do fairly soon. That fairly soon is how long your project iteration is. And here we're talking days and very few weeks of that. We're not talking months. So we'll talk about how do you boil your work down to the level of a story. But consider that everything that you have to do can be written up as a story. And when you've written up all your stories, you have a product backlog, which you need to prioritize. The product owner prioritizes that backlog. That's the principal responsibility of the product owner, is to make sure that product backlog is complete and each story is good. Like you can pick it up and you can work on it. This is an example of a story. As a small business owner, I want a single place to file all my quarterly reports so I don't have to deal with multiple agencies. This is a story I would urge somebody in this room to pick up, because I'm a small business owner. I would really like one place to file all my reports. So if anybody gets inspired enough to actually do this, I'll be really happy. Okay? But this is how a story is normally written. And this could be a typical story. The components of a story you can write as a particular way. There's an as a, there's a I want to, and there's a so that I can. So let's see what these pieces are. First of all, as a who. I wrote the story as a small business owner. I don't know if that's good enough. It might be. It might be a place to start. But you don't want to write stories where, first of all, you can't distinguish between what a fellow employee in an agency wants and what a citizen out there wants. That's a common mistake people will make. They'll think the people out there want what we need. No, we want something completely different. We talk differently than you folks, right? So get the who right, because that focuses on who this is for. Maybe it's not enough to say a small business owner. Maybe you need to identify me as a small software business owner before you can get clarity around the story. Because as a small software owner who actually doesn't own any physical assets, I have different needs than maybe somebody who runs a dry cleaning business who has an environmental impact, right? So you really need to get the who part figured out. Then there's a what. What is it that I want? If I'm a small business owner, this is one of my wants. Actually, I have many wants. If anybody wants a list, I'm upstairs. I have a lot of wants. But that's the essence of the story. As this person, I want this. And what I always recommend is the last part, the why, because later on, this is going to provide direction when you start doing this story. Why do I want this? Because I don't want to go to an unknown number of websites, file reports, right? So that's why. What a story does not have is how. It does not say anything about how. That's going to be done in the sprint. So it just expresses a bunch of things that need to get done. The product owner makes no attempt to figure out how it's going to be done. He just says, look, this is what the citizens want. This is what the agency needs, whatever it is. That's what a story is. Any questions so far? Okay. So you've heard of stories, and you've heard of epics. What's an epic? A really long story. So an epic is a really big story that you can break down into multiple stories. Why do you want to do that? Because you want the story to be small enough that it can be done in a sprint. So you look at that one story, as a small business owner, I want blah, blah, blah. Can you do that in, let's say, 2 weeks? Probably not. In that case, you need to break that down. You keep breaking that down until what you have left, each piece you feel you can do in a sprint. So that's how you go from epics to stories. So think of an epic as some really big want, and a story as more singular part of that want that you think you can get done. So why stop there? You can also have the concept of epics, stories, and tasks, right? So you start off with a big want, like I want this, I want world peace. That's a really large epic. And then you have stories related to that. And then as you start working on the individual stories, you have these things called tasks, which are very, very practical. Do this, do this, do this, do this, right? The tasks start getting into the how. The story didn't. The story talked about what I want. But the tasks start getting into how do I achieve that want? Well, here are the 5 things that will explain the how of that. Okay? And you'll have multiple epics. So here's an example. Let's say we wanted to create a mobile-friendly version of the OFM agency website. I'm not picking on them by any means, but I just want to find an example that I hope you guys can relate to. There are at least 2 stories that are possible. Actually, there are many stories that are possible. But one says, as a citizen, what do I want? And the other story says, as an employee, I want something completely different. You know, as an employee, I want to be able to access HR docs on my phone. Oh, as a citizen, I have no interest in that. But as a citizen, I may want to look up salaries of certain officials. Okay? And that last story, which says, as an employee, I want to be able to access HR docs, you can think of one task, which is, okay, there are a lot of HR docs. One of them is the sick leave request form. Let's reformat that one thing. Because that one task will get us somewhere towards accomplishing the story. So here, that's your hierarchy: epics, stories, and tasks. We use something called story points. What are story points? Story points are a made-up thing. Some people think they're the same as hours and days. They're not really. They're a way of saying, this is big, and this is much bigger, and this is really huge. So the simplest thing, you give a story point of 1. Like, this is the simplest thing I can imagine doing. Maybe it takes 5 minutes, maybe it takes an hour. It's a relative thing. Then you look at this other thing and go, this is twice as big as that thing. Now, I still don't know what that first thing will take, but this looks twice as big, twice as complex. That's 2 points. This looks 3 times as big. This looks 5 times as big. This looks really big, like 8. You notice my words start getting a little vaguer? Because as things get more and more complex, you're really, really guessing. So what really helps is something that you may or may not remember from high school math called the Fibonacci series, which is a way of picking numbers that get progressively larger. And the reason you need that is because the way I like to put it is that complexity is not linear, which means something that is twice as difficult would probably take more than twice as long. That's why story points are not hours. You thought you can do this in 1 hour, this is twice as complex, you might need more than 2 hours. And if this is 8 times as complex, you're definitely going to need more than a day, right? So story points in Scrum, we start to think in terms of saying, I really don't know what any of these things will take, but I can tell you this is twice as big as this one. And this is 5 times as big as this other one. So in a sprint, so we talked about planning the work, we have stories. Before a sprint, we do something called grooming the backlog. This is something the product manager does constantly. The product owner is just waiting for the next sprint to start so he can get more stuff done. So the product owner makes sure the stories are good and they're in the right order. There's something called sprint planning, which is a formal meeting where the entire sprint team sits down with the product owner and says, how much of this backlog can we bite off? Okay? Let's say I have a 1-month sprint, which is kind of large, by the way. I'll talk about how big sprint should be. I have a 1-month sprint. I can do 5 things, maybe 3 things. I don't know. It depends on how big the things are, right? And how much time I have. But they try to pick a doable set of priorities, prioritize items. So remember, your backlog is this long list of stuff in priorities. You start, so I'll do the first one for sure. Can I also manage the second one? Can I also manage the third one? And when you reach a point where you say, I can't do any more in this 2 weeks, you stop. And what you've done is taken a chunk and said, this is what we're committing to do in this sprint. Okay? During the work, you have daily stand-up meetings, and these are designed to help people quickly understand where they are relative to everybody else. It's like, I haven't seen you for 24 hours because I've been locked down in my office working on this thing. What's been going on in your life? And this is what I've been doing, by the way. I'll talk a little bit about burn down. Burn down is a way of trying to see, is this sprint going to make it? Like we said we're going to do 5 stories, and let's say they add up to 25 story points. We're halfway through the sprint. Are we going to make it? Well, it would help if you knew that you had done half the points already. But if you've done like 2 points, and you're not going to get the remaining 23 points done in the last half of the sprint, right? That's probably not going to happen. The burn down chart provides early warning during the sprint about the likelihood that the team will deliver what it promised. So all it does is kind of prepare you for what might be a disappointment down the line. It can also suggest that maybe this team is burning through the work, like so, and they can pick up more work. That would be nice. It doesn't happen real often, to be honest. At the end of the sprint, there is something called show and tell. So the team presents their work formally to the product owner. So you asked for this thing. You said, as a small business owner, I want blah. Here. Do you accept what we've done? That's called done. Done really means something important here. Done means the product owner accepted it. And hopefully you will never revisit it, okay? So there's something called the sprint show and tell at the very end. And finally, you have something called sprint retrospective. This is something that's often overlooked because people say, it's kind of like fluffy stuff. You look back and you say, how do we do? The most important thing you can do in a sprint retrospective is say, how good were these stories? Because you're actually judging the product owner as much as you are judging the team. Because did the product owner do a good enough job that the stories were clearly defined, they were small enough, they were sized right that we could actually do them? If the stories are good, how do we do as a team? Like, did we actually finish? Did we overcommit? Did we lowball our commitment? And you want to have this reflection at the end of every sprint so you can get a little better for the next one. How long should a sprint be? It really depends. In my personal opinion, 1 week is pretty short. I know some people out there who do one-day sprints. I really don't know what they're doing. 1 month is pretty long. I've tried that. And the problem with having a month-long sprint is you forget you're doing Scrum. So I've personally settled on 2 weeks. I find that to be a really good number. If you ask me, I would say 2 weeks. But what's important is, in whatever my size of sprint is, I need to be able to finish at least one story, right? So I have to make my stories small enough and my big sprint long enough that at least one thing can get done. Actually, I need more than one thing done, but if I don't get one thing done, then something is just not working here. whatever your duration is, try to be consistent. Try to follow a pattern. If it's 2 weeks this time, it should really be 2 weeks next time, unless you find that 2 weeks just isn't working for you. In which case you can change it. But don't make them like random numbers. Don't decide that you're going to have a short sprint for some reason because it's like Thanksgiving week. No, it's not. It just means you have the same duration sprint, but you commit to less because people are going to take off in Thanksgiving. Right? You try to keep that rhythm going. Rhythm is really important in Scrum. So in an ideal world, you'll have a product backlog on the back. I hope you guys can see it in the back. You do one sprint. Let's say you pick up 3 stories. They get moved over to done. You do another sprint, pick up 3 stories. They get moved over to done. And now you've got just 2 stories left, and the last sprint just cleans it all up. That's how it works in theory. In real life, this is what happens. You start off trying to do 3 stories, and a third one doesn't make it. In Scrum, it's kind of binary. Either a story is done, or it's not done. It's not 80% done. It's either got accepted as a complete story, or it's not done. So don't play percentage games. I mean, never play percentage games anyway, but don't do it in Scrum because it really makes no sense here. Right? So in reality, what frequently will happen is that third story will be almost there, but didn't quite make it. And if it didn't quite make it, it goes back in the backlog where it can be picked up for the following sprint. So you might find that it doesn't take just 3 sprints. It takes 4 or 5 sprints, maybe. That's a learning process you guys are going to go through. Okay? But remember, done has to be really done. You cannot have it 80% done in one sprint and 20% cleaned up in the next one. Because you know how that 20% goes, right? It'll never get done. So imagine this is a timeline. You're doing all these stories. And depending upon how you're doing them, an epic might be delivered finally after 1.5 sprints. Maybe another epic gets delivered towards the end of that sprint, right? Because an epic is a collection of stories. So that's going to get done. And this is the basic cycle. So during the sprint, the most important thing is to protect the team, which means at the beginning of the sprint, the product owner has a lot of opportunity to voice preferences about what should get done and what should not get done. Once the sprint starts, the product owner needs to shut up and remain shut and wait for that sprint to end. Because it's not like a 6-month sprint, right? It's only 2 weeks. And we're halfway through this week, so it's like 3 days, as Seinfeld said once, right? You're not that far away from being able to voice your opinions again. Until now and then, you really need to keep shut as a product owner. Because we are trying to protect the team so they can get done what they committed to without you randomizing them. Okay? I'll show you an example of a burn down chart. I'll talk about it in a second. The show and tell I already emphasized. The product owner must formally accept. Okay. Let's talk about the daily stand-ups. In a daily stand-up, normally you want to answer 3 questions. What have you done since I last saw you at yesterday's stand-up? What are you going to do between now and tomorrow's stand-up? And what's blocking you? And this should take no more than 2 minutes. That's why it's a stand-up. We don't encourage sitting down during stand-ups because people get tired of standing and they leave faster. That's why it's a stand-up, by the way. Ideal place to have a stand-up is in a hallway, a busy hallway where people are getting annoyed by you. That puts social pressure on you to finish and get back to work. Do not have a stand-up sitting down in a conference room. That is not a stand-up anymore. That is a meeting. Okay? And I explained a little bit about the Scrum Master stuff. A burn-down chart is a simple chart that says how many story points are remaining, that's the vertical axis, and how much time do I have left. And in an ideal world, your burn-down chart would go like that. Every day you're getting like some part of it done, right? That's the ideal theory of a burn-down chart. In reality, your burn-down will look like this. Nothing will get done for a long time, and something will get delivered. Then nothing gets delivered for a long time, and everyone starts panicking. But actually, when it finally gets done, it's worth a lot of points. And boom, you get this big, and you're like ahead all of a sudden. And then you're behind. and then you get slightly ahead, and then you run out of time. And something didn't quite make it. That's what burn down charts look like. The point of a burn down chart is if that is really a wacky shape, the product owner can manage his or her expectations of what they will get before the sprint is over. The sprint is not like some black box that the product owner can't see into. Product owner can see what's the likelihood of things getting done. The team has a sense for the likelihood that they're actually going to make their commitments. Okay? So that's the concept of a burn down chart. There's a concept of something called velocity. Velocity is simply saying, okay, we did a sprint. How many points did we do? 10? 20? It doesn't matter. Okay. So how many did we do the sprint before? 18. So maybe our velocity is 19, the average. It's a way to look back and say, you know, this team seems to do 19, 20 points worth of work every 2 weeks. And that's really helpful for helping you figure out what you're going to do in the next 2 weeks. Because when you plan your next sprint, you can say, okay, we know we can do about 19, 20 points, so let's only commit to that. What's important to understand about velocity is because it's looking back, in the beginning you have no idea what your velocity is. You need to accept that, your manager needs to accept that. You cannot tell anyone what your velocity will be unless at least 2 or 3 sprints have gone, and then you can look back and say, you know, I think I know the capacity of this team. It runs at about 15, 20 points. So that's, now you can look at all the stuff in the backlog, divide that by velocity and tell you how long it'll take. So it's kind of problematic for a lot of managers because it's like, until we start the work, we can't really tell you really when it'll end, you know. The other thing that's really important, this is one thing I want to emphasize, velocity will flatline. Do not let your manager ask you for increasing velocity every sprint. The only way to give increasing velocity every sprint is to game the system, which is really easy because now, because we're dealing with this funny money called story points, you can just start giving more story points to yourself. So something that you would have previously said was only 2 story points, now you say, that's 3 points. I want to take credit for 3. And if you want more bigger velocity, I'll take credit for 4. Right? So you're dealing with funny money here, and you can very easily end up with inflation. So story points should increase a little bit as the team gels. Your velocity should flatline. And no manager should boast to another manager, my team does 20 points, your team only does 15. Because you're both using funny money from different countries. Right? So it's a totally meaningless way to boast to your peers. Getting Scrum right, this is where theory really departs from reality. First of all, Scrum does not believe a team can be distributed. I have never worked with a team that was not distributed. So we need to figure out how to make Scrum work when your team is not in the same place. I assure you, not one single person in this room is truly co-located with their team all the time, unless you're living with each other. You're here in a conference room. Your team is not. You just became part of a distributed team. Right now, you're distributed. If you go out for lunch, you became distributed for that 1 hour. Right? So every team is distributed. Our own Kerika team is distributed in a kind of extreme way. We're spread out over 10,000 miles, which turns out to be as far as you can go before you start coming back again. The other problem with Scrum theory is that it assumes anybody can do anything. I don't know why it assumes that, because I find that, first of all, that's not true. And secondly, I can do Scrum without that assumption. So in my opinion, that's a helpful, misleading assumption that you might find somewhere that says, oh, it's just this beautiful, pure team that can just like anybody can pick up any work and do anything. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. The other problem with Scrum theory is it says the story points should only be given to things that add new business value. But there's other stuff you need to do as a team. There are things we call chores. Maybe just going to training is like a chore. I mean, you have to do it, right? Or the defects in the work that you did that need to be repaired. So some Scrum trainers like to say, from a theory point of view, if you're just repairing something that was previously accepted as done, you don't get to call that any story points. I find that really not helpful in planning. Because I might have a whole sprint where my velocity is suddenly 0, because all I'm doing is like fixing bugs, which are really, really important to fix. But now my velocity just kind of goes like this, and now I don't even have a useful velocity number. Like, I don't know how that helps anybody, but that's where I totally disagree with the theoretical thing that says only count things that add new value. That's not my life. What I find very helpful is have a sprint theme. You've got a lot of stories to do. Try to find a theme. It works much better when everyone thinks, okay, we're all working together, and there's this little theme, this little goal we're trying to achieve, as opposed to we're all working together and it's totally random. We just pick stories at random. That's hard, for a team. So try to pick a sprint theme that unites the team, Okay. Finally, we have what I call the nuclear option. A nuclear option is really, really important. Once the sprint starts, it cannot be changed in the middle. If I was a Scrum Master and my product owner says, oops, sorry, I forgot to bring this in 2 days ago during the sprint planning, but it's really important, can you add it in? I would always present the nuclear option and say, listen, I cannot change the sprint. If you like, I can blow it up. We will stop the sprint and start a whole new sprint. This sprint is a washout. It really works well because it makes the product owner think, how important is this thing that I've suddenly thought of doing? Do I really want to exercise the nuclear option here? Because that's the only, product owners don't really like that kind of option, but you have to present it in that way. Think, it's all or nothing. We're going to blow the sprint up. We're going to stop right now. Fine, because we're totally responsive people. We do whatever you want. But this is what you're asking for. You're asking to blow up the whole sprint. Okay? Where does Scrum work best? Not everywhere, by the way. It's not like everybody needs to start Scrumming right away. It works best where the work is new. That means your strategy and your tactics are not completely known. Sometimes you have to do stuff that your agency has never done before. Right? Recognize that uncertainty in there and try to organize your projects to deal with that uncertainty. Sometimes you do stuff that is very well understood and you don't need Scrum, to be honest. Okay? Use Scrum in a situation where things are fluid. Maybe the policy is fluid. Maybe you're working with technology that is kind of fluid, or the requirements. Wherever there's uncertainty, Scrum helps. Where there's certainty, Scrum is kind of overkill, in my opinion. And use Scrum where you can establish a rhythm, like saying, hey, we have a 2-week rhythm we're trying to do. There should be some natural rhythm. If you're trying to create rhythm where actually there's no rhythm to be had, or no rhythm that emerges, it's probably a bad fit, because you're trying to make a team adopt a 2-week sprint or a 3-week sprint or whatever it is, and actually everybody has some different thing going on, and so that's not a Scrum team, in my opinion. Government makes it really hard to do Scrum, in my opinion, because you need regulatory flexibility, which you probably don't have, in terms of purchasing services. You cannot hire a bunch of consultants or developers, for example, and say, we have this Scrum project, it's got a little fuzzy edges. You can't actually put out an RFP like that I know of. It's hard because you need budget flexibility, which you may or may not get. It's like, we are going into a project with a lot of uncertainty, so we'd like a little bit of fuzziness around the edge of our budget. That's kind of tough. It's tough at a very large level. It's actually doable, and I have seen agencies do it at a small level and start to establish a track record that they can use to advocate for more and more of it. But you want to start small, but you need some flexibility around that. You also need organizational flexibility, and this is often misunderstood here, or overlooked, I would say. A Scrum Master is not an elevated position. It's almost an administrative position. The project manager disappeared. That messes with people's ideas of how their career should develop. It also messes with people's ideas a little bit about the idea that everyone on the team is kind of empowered, even though this person just joined and I've been around forever. Like, that's really my equal? It also is hard for the junior person to say, I should really speak up. I should pull work. So there's a lot of organizational issues around this, and I'll be frank, Scrum is hard to do in government because government is not set up for flexibility around people, money, or purchasing, pretty much anything actually. You know, but it is being done, and what people are doing is doing it on a small scale, showing their management, showing the funders even, look, this leads to better outcomes. It's a fuzzy process that leads to better outcomes because, you know, the other stuff where you pretended you knew exactly what you're going to do, how much you're going to spend, when it's going to be done, you know, that was just a joke, right? I mean, it never happened that way, right? Where does Kanban work best? Kanban works best in a lot of places, by the way, probably more than Scrum in your particular environment. I think Kanban works well when work just comes in continuously and is roughly of the same size and shape. Perfect example I would take is an IT help desk. All day long, they get called by people who say, printer doesn't work, I forgot my password. Printer doesn't work, I forgot my password. Right? All day long, that goes on. Right? And every instance is about the same size. You forgot your password, I'll have to help you reset it. It doesn't matter if it's the director of the agency or an intern, it's about the same amount of work to reset the password. Right? And it can be done by anybody. So anyone who picks up the phone or picks up your ticket in the help desk can work on it. It doesn't really matter. And it's reprioritized continuously because it's just like a continuously changing pile of stuff. The work is really well understood. No one has to reinvent multiple times how to reset a password or fix a printer. And so anything where you're doing case management, where the work is very well understood and can very easily be categorized, there's no discovery involved. I would say Kanban works really well. Scrum is probably overkill. Scrum is really great when there's uncertainty. But there's a lot of things that you guys do for which there's no uncertainty, right? So I would say stick with Kanban. Also recognize that you are never flying solo. You are part of many different collaboration networks. Right now, there's some things that you do by yourself, for yourself. There's some things you work with this person, some things you work with these two people, some where some of these people come together. Almost every sort of white or pink collar shirt person like me is working on multiple things at the same time. So they're actually part of multiple collaboration networks. We don't recognize that. We think we only do one thing with one set of people. I would say just reflect on that sometime, not right now, and think about it. How many different people do you actually support? How many initiatives do you have a finger in? You know, how many committees or things that are going on, things that you expect to review? You're not really part of the team, but someone wants you to review it. You're part of that collaboration network. So in this kind of a situation, okay, you're here. This stops working really fast. This is how a lot of people approach Kanban, sticky notes. The problem with that, you know, apart from the fact that I need like a fisheye view to even capture this board, this is fine if I'm standing in front of it. But if you accept my premise that I'm not standing in front of it all the time, that's a problem. If I'm working out of Spokane or Yakima, I may never visit Olympia. So the fact that all you Olympia folks are having a great time hanging around the stickies, actually, it pisses me off, you know. Right? It's really exclusionary. Because I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and you guys take your phone out and you send this thing, you know, a bunch of stickies. The other thing is when I zoom in on a sticky, it has 3 words on it. And I can't tell whether it's a compliment, a problem, or just some random thought, because it's so compressed. And I just have to wait for that sticky to dry up and fall off, right? And then we're all kind of equal. So I really believe what we need are software tools. This is an example of somebody in OFM who's, let me share this thing. She's been using actually the product that I've been developing, which this is her personal task board. She lets a lot of people see at any time what she's working on. The beauty of that is, a lady named Melissa, I never have to wonder what is Melissa working on, or why hasn't Melissa gotten to my thing yet? Well, I can kind of see why she hasn't, because she has all this stuff going on here. So this is personal Kanban that she's doing here. You can also have a more complex example. I know this is going to be really fuzzy in the back there, but see me afterwards. I'll show you this stuff in more detail. You can have teams of people working together. This is an example actually from Department of Agriculture that I took. This is a board that they're using for grain safety. I'm trying to relate to you folks out in government, so you have to give me points for effort at least. Okay. This is an example of a marketing team, not in government, who uses it for Scrum. So you can't really tell. I'll try to point this out. There are two boards here. You notice that they have the same backlog. That's because one is Sprint 94 and now they're Sprint 95, which kind of tells you how long they've been doing this. They have 95 sprints already. Okay. So these kinds of tools are possible where now your stickies, you can capture a story as a virtual sticky. You can actually write some detail around that. You can create tasks around that. You can attach content to that, like files, for example. You can chat and so forth. So once you start doing this in software, right, your sticky gets infused with magic that only software can bring. Obviously, in the software business, I believe it has magic. You can open one of these sticky notes and have a lot of rich containers, rich information about it. You can find out about the work, some details around it. You can find the files that was attached to it. You can find out what people talked about, right? Please.
Is there a software or an app that you would recommend?
My shill in the audience says, is there some software I would like to recommend? I happen to be in the business of producing such software. Oh, let me think. That would be my product. Carica is upstairs. We're a sponsor of this thing, by the way. I don't want to push my product here. That's not. I really won't try to make a class out of this. It just so happens that every problem that I've said you face, we happen to have already solved. It's just kind of a happy coincidence that all of these things can be done if you come upstairs and visit me. Okay. The main point I would summarize is you do need technology to scale. Whether it's Kanban or Scrum, you need to be able to scale. Scale within the project and across projects. As a department, you need to be able to see what's going on many things at the same time. You should be pragmatic, not dogmatic. I am not a consultant, so I don't try to sell the theoretical version of Scrum because I don't get paid for that. So I have no interest in trying to tell you that this is the theoretical model. You have this perfect team that is so super well organized, never leaves anywhere in sight, is never disturbed. Nothing ever happens to that team. That's not actually how it goes, in my opinion. So you need to be pragmatic. That's the last point I want to make on this slide. I'm going to come back to the others, which is think of Scrum, in software, which is where it came from, every way of doing work eventually gets the status of religion, right? And you get religious wars around it. That's fine. If you're going to take that metaphor and say, if this is a religion, try to understand the philosophy of it instead of just following the rituals. So instead of just saying, we have a daily stand-up because we heard that's a good thing, try to understand what the purpose of the stand-up was. The purpose of the stand-up is to say, where am I, where are you, what are you blocked on? That's what I really want to know. What's stopping this Scrum team from achieving its goals? So that the Scrum Master can run off and start knocking down those impediments. How many of you folks knew that was what a stand-up is meant for? Okay, a couple of folks. But how many of you folks have been doing stand-ups without knowing this? No one wants to put their hand up. I don't believe you guys. The point of Scrum, like Kanban, is that it should be a reflective, I don't know if that's right. It should be a process that involves reflection. At the end of every sprint, have a sprint retrospective. Don't skip that because you're tired or you don't want to do, you don't have time. A sprint retrospective answers the following questions. How good were the stories? Were they clear enough that we knew exactly what needed to get done? Over time, the stories will get clear enough. In the beginning, it's highly unlikely that the stories you got from the product owner were good enough. They probably involve going back and forth a lot. So you want to track, are we doing better with the stories than we did like the last couple of sprints? If you're not, we need to work with the product owner and say, why are you presenting stories in this way when obviously we don't understand you're looking from this direction? We need to understand as a team, how is the velocity? Is it stabilizing? Are we just like going all over the place? Why is that? Velocity changes most often because of one simple thing, the team changes. You cannot swap one person out with another without the velocity changing. Okay? So people say, I had 5 people before, I have 5 people now. Why is my velocity changing? Because one of those 5 people is different. So Scrum is actually very human-centered. It says, understand that this team of 5 people will come together and have interactions that can't be captured or measured in software, but you can observe the result of that by saying they do 20 points. Now, if you change one of those people, you'll either get 15 or 25, but you probably won't get 20. If you don't get 20, you need to understand that change you made was probably the reason. Very rarely it's because you change your duration. Obviously, then you have to kind of normalize the numbers a little bit. If you went from 2 weeks to 3 week sprint, you can't compare the two outputs anymore. That's not usually the case. And the biggest problem I find is people swap people out and think that nothing happened. Scrum expects the team dynamics to change when the team changes. So velocity doesn't really stabilize until the team has been in place for a few sprints, right? So really try to make sure everybody understands that. You obviously need to get buy-in, right? So this is a different way of working. I don't know how feasible it is for everyone in this room. I'm glad you all came and listened to this stuff. Now you might be going away thinking, this is not for me. But I believe it can be done in government, but in a small scale initially to start creating some proof points. No one's going to believe that Scrum is right for your agency simply because you came to this conference and you met this incredibly persuasive guy here, right? You'd have to go back and do a little bit of Scrum, a few sprints, and start seeing, you know, do we have better transparency? Do we actually have a better idea of what's predictable in terms of what will actually get done, as opposed to what we theoretically should get done? What does it mean to start working in a pull model when people don't get push work on, right? Oh, I forgot to mention, one of the things I also do in a retrospective is, very important, nearly always overlooked, check the health of the team. The health of the team is the team still relatively happy? Very often, this gets overlooked because the team has been under pressure, sprint after sprint, and it's actually, people are starting to get really burnt out, and no one is asking them, how are you feeling as a team? Because everyone is just looking at the numbers. But looking at the health of the team is a critical part of the retrospective, right? So there's a lot of soft stuff that I think is really important. That's why I said, understand the philosophy of Scrum. It deals with uncertainty, it deals with people, right? Just don't say, what's my burn down chart, and how many points do I have, and blah, blah. Yeah, that's all, those are all artifacts of the ritual, right? They're not the key thing here. In my experience, and I've worked really long time, it turns out, 35 years or something like that. As a manager, a team that's burning out is always a serious risk factor. In other words, never be tempted by the idea of saying, I know this guy's just about ready to break down, but we only have 1 more sprint left, 2 more sprints left, right? Because that person could be, who's burnt out, ultimately going to have a toxic effect on everybody around them because everybody else knows they're burnt out, even if no one's talking about it, right? And I've often been tempted to say, you know, I never liked this person anyway. let them burn out just 2 more weeks and then like I get my bonus or something. No, they don't. I'm not saying you'd ever think of doing that. I've thought of doing that. It didn't work for me. So I'm just telling you that, it won't work for you. So the question is, in software, are units of measure like lines of code applicable? Well, this doesn't say you can't measure that, right? But frankly, it's kind of irrelevant in this thing because Scrum, the beauty of Scrum is you recognize that all you can tell is that something is twice as big as this other thing without necessarily knowing what this other thing is, right? So I love the idea of story points. And also I love the idea of this increasing range Fibonacci because when you get to 5, 8, 13, 21, you're just guessing your ass off at that point, right? And so you can't go from 8 to 10, you go from 8 to 13. You can't go from 13 to 15, you go from 13 to 21. And 21 basically means I have no clue what this piece of work is. So how do you go about doing individual performance metrics? Scrum by itself doesn't really actually pay much attention to the individual. It does emphasize the team and the idea that how good is the team doing. I think you can still measure individual performance, and I think Scrum would encourage you to measure that individual's performance and how they raise the team's productivity, right? The most valuable people in a Scrum team blow away everybody else's impediments. And that's maybe all a Scrum Master does, is just make sure nobody is slowed down or blocked. But just think about how nice that is, right? Knowing that you can work, the moment you hit an impediment, you can just raise this red flag and somebody solves that for you. Somebody chases that manager in the other department who won't return your phone calls. That's actually an amazingly good feeling, right? And if that person can do it, I would say that's the most valuable person on our team. Because that one person makes everybody else get their job done. So maybe I have a different kind of approach of performance, but I think the most valuable person on a team is who gets the team to do the most work. Ideally, a Scrum team should self-regulate, right? In practice, once a team is mature, and in some industries, like in software, Scrum teams get mature enough that they will expel the foreign body that they can't absorb, right? But that's only possible in an environment where the management also has to trust the team that there's not something petty going on. If you have an experienced people of Scrum, they can recognize on their own what their problems are and fix them. In my teams, we always have some performer who disappoints. And I use the word disappoint because, maybe the problem was my expectation. The way I've dealt with it is the team has readjusted to say, okay, it turns out this person is only capable of this much. We thought it was this much, but it is not. It's this much. So in future sprints, we plan accordingly. So I guess my teams have always been more evolutionary, just saying, okay, we'll try to figure out how to live with this thing and adjust the expectations. You only want to expel somebody if they are, for the same reason you actually have a real problem with them. They're like seriously antisocial or something, they're actually harming people, But if somebody is simply not performing at the level you want it to, I think the team should just adjust its future commitments. Because you now know what your true commitments are, what your ability is. That's the reality, right? You don't have a team of superstars. You have a mixed team, There'll be some spread. There'll be some people who are new or weak or whatever for say. As long as that person is not a bad employee, I don't think the Scrum team needs to expel them. Question there? So the point of the nuclear option is to make an option so frightening that no one will exercise it, hopefully. We'll find that out. What I like about the nuclear option is that, see, whenever I've gone in to introduce Scrum, and I've had to go in and introduce Scrum into organizations, the first one was Microsoft in 2006, one part of Microsoft. And we had a problem with the product owner who sat down the hall from the team. I just kept walking down the hall with new ideas. So I got an office that was in the middle of the hall. And I kept my door open. I just waited for the product owner to go by, and I'd jump out and stop the person. At first, it was diversionary tactics, like try to talk about something else. Oh, come in, I want you to see something. But after a while, I realized that wasn't working. So I sat down and I said, I'll give you the nuclear option. If you believe this print is badly constituted, you can blow it up anytime you want. Here you go. Here's the nuclear football. Right? Go ahead. But consider that everyone will know you blew this print up. And somebody will probably ask, why did he blow this print up? And you have to have some non-petty reason for having done that. Right? And in all the years, I don't know of anyone that's ever exercised a nuclear option, which means it works really well as a nuclear option. There's actually a very interesting technique used in Scrum, which I didn't get into. It's kind of a detail. It's called planning poker. Have you guys heard of planning poker? One person has. Okay. What you try to do is you give everybody a set of cards which contain these numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you discuss a story, and you ask each person to think, how big is the story? And then you say, okay, and everyone puts up a card at the same time, which is their best guess. Then you see how widely spread their numbers are. If some guy puts up 1 and some guy puts up 21, then clearly you do not have a shared understanding of that story. So you go back and you rediscuss that story. Why do you think it's 1? Why do you think it's 21? And you do that repeatedly, playing more and more rounds of this planning poker, till you get, like everyone says, it's actually a 5, right? So that's something you can do in sprint planning to get convergence around, like, are we all talking about the same story in the same way? I find that really helpful because, you know, when you see somebody bidding really high, somebody bidding really low, you have to ask, like, why do you think this is like no piece of work? Why do you think this is going to take forever? And often you learn a lot about the story in the process. Any other questions? I'm upstairs and here today and tomorrow. Frequently lonely, so come and visit. I also have the very best chocolates. You may have heard of my chocolates. It's quite well known among people who know. Thank you all for coming.